What's up, War Rapport family? We are back with another great edition of Building Rapport. Joining me today is a very special guest, senior writer for ESPN.com, Heather Dinich joins us to talk a little bit about her travels around the spring. She visited Auburn Football this spring. Heather, I wanted to get your thoughts on things that you saw this spring. You got the chance to sit down with Hugh Freeze. What were your first impressions of the man when you sat down with Hugh Freeze this spring?
Well, just a little bit of background. That is the most extensive time that I have spent with him. I didn't know him very well. I guess I could say I still don't know him very well. But he was gracious with his time and let me in the team meeting. So I sat through the whole team meeting, which was important because I got to see the message that he sent to his team. Just here's the thing. I went in there with a completely blank perspective on him and his past and all of that. And I think that's super important because it is not my job to tell you who he is as a human being. It's my job to tell you what's going on there. And so I went in with zero preconceived notions or anything. I mean, I obviously knew what had happened, right? I'm not naive about the past transgressions. But I wasn't walking into that interview to judge Hugh Freeze. And I tell this to people all the time. This is your story. It's not mine. I can't make you talk. I'll ask the questions. And so we had a good conversation. And, there's one part in the story where I wrote exactly what he did. He raised his hand and he said, I did it. Is that who I am? No, it's not. And so he was able to say that. And we'll see what happens at Auburn because he has a lot of work to do. And I think if there was one big takeaway from that trip, it was that. I mean, we all know what a high pressure packed job he's in at a time when Alabama and Georgia are where they are. So he's got a lot of work to do and he knows that.
Heather, in your article, you described Auburn as one of the toughest jobs in the country. When you were spending time around the program, did you get a sense of the pressure, the things that make that job so difficult?
Not necessarily there that day. And I went through the new facility. Kirk Sampson, the SID, took me around and it was a terrific tour. And so in a way, you see the money being poured into it. You see the resources that are there. So in a way, yes. But I think a lot of those conversations with boosters are behind the scenes with recruiting. I mean, that's where, and he said that, and I believe he said it to another media outlet too. I can't remember, but that was the one thing that when he took this job, he was not ready for, which was the NIL aspect of everything. So he was kind of getting that together and learning that on the fly because it certainly wasn't like that at Liberty. But no, you don't feel that when you're walking around on a spring. And that's why I love going to schools in the spring because the coaches are relaxed. They're sitting in their office. They're all undefeated. They're happy to chat. And spring ball is a time for learning and getting to know the kids. So it's not like that then, but it is certainly like that the moment they kick off.
As far as the roster he inherited, you had time to sit down with him and you had your own feelings about, the roster on your way out, right? You had tweeted that maybe the wide receiver room would need some patience, right? In terms of development. What do you think Hugh Freeze's idea is about what he can do with the current roster as constructed?
One of the things I asked him and we talked about was how he did it at the other schools. 10-win seasons everywhere he's been. So what besides recruiting has been your blueprint? And part of his answer to that was something he couldn't necessarily explain or quantify, but it was about a coach's innate ability to extract the most out of the players you had and make them better than they are. And I think that if he can do that with this group and maybe exceed expectations a little bit and next year do the same thing, giving himself some time to bring in those big time recruits that Auburn needs, wants, and expects to have, that's how you eventually close the gap with Alabama and Georgia. And I think he certainly, as I pointed out in the article, I don't have the numbers in front of me, he is pulling in some of those recruits, and he is making progress in that lane, and it's tangible. You can see it. But let's not sugarcoat it here. Recruiting is what got him in trouble at Ole Miss, and as I was writing the story, I wanted to illustrate, hey, he got these guys here under what circumstances, so it was a little bit of a balance between making sure people understand this guy can get players, but he also got in trouble for it, right? So let's see how this all plays out at Auburn. But he knows. And, I often wonder when talking to coaches how much, in speaking to the media, they give themselves a cushion. Like, this is going to take a while. Make sure everybody knows this is going to take a while. And, that's out there, right? But what is the true grace period? I mean, look at what Billy Napier has gone through at Florida. Like, give the man a skinny minute to get some put his stamp on the program type thing.
Hugh Freeze, in his introductory press conference, touted two things. He said, I develop quarterbacks and I turn programs around quickly. So there is somewhat of an expectation that in year one, he will have some level of success that points toward, I've got things headed the right direction. Given what you've seen traveling around the SEC with Auburn's quarterback situation, do you think Hugh Freeze believes in his heart that he can compete with the stable of quarterbacks that he has? Dynamic quarterback play rules the day in the SEC right now, or even in college football. You see it, the top teams have dynamic quarterback play. CJ Stroud, Bryce Young, Stetson Bennett raised his game in this last championship season for Georgia. Can Hugh Freeze, in his mind, win with the quarterbacks that he has?
I truly don't think he knows that yet, especially with some of the movement that's gone on with the transfer portal and how that could all play out. But he didn't say this to me out loud, but I think it would be naive to think that he has a Heisman CJ Stroud on his roster or a Bryce Young. He doesn't right now. Might somebody evolve into that at some point? Yeah, but to your point, nobody's going to mistake any of these guys for Trevor Lawrence, right? It's not, that's just the reality of it. And what can he do with what he has, I think, is going to be reflective of exactly what he's talking about in terms of extracting the most out of what he has to work with. But, we'll see how that plays out. But the bottom line is this: Georgia and Alabama are at different places. And I'm not a believer that Alabama's dynasty is over. I'm not a doomsayer in the Nick Saban era by any stretch of the imagination. Is Georgia the king of college football right now? 100%. I agree with Nick Saban. They've got a lot of work to do. So it's not just Auburn trying to catch Georgia. It's Ohio State. It's Alabama. It's everyone. But Auburn has the widest gap in terms of what's going on right now, talent-wise, I think.
Yeah, I like how people act like Alabama still doesn't have 1 million 5-stars on their roster, and they're just going to fall into the college football dungeon because they didn't have the greatest season or they didn't win the championship. There is pressure to win championships in the SEC, and I think if you look everywhere but Vanderbilt, there's an expectation when you hire a coach that he will have your team in contention at least every year, right? Auburn has paid over $30 million, you noted in your article, in buyout money to coaches. And they landed on Hugh Freeze, who was a controversial pick. Now, you had a chance to talk to John Cohen about the vetting process for Hugh Freeze. Tell us a little bit about that conversation and what your thoughts are on, how they arrived at Hugh Freeze, even amid some of the backlash based on his past.
Cohen told me that he talked to, and he said, I don't have the list in front of me, but there are probably over 100 people in terms of, background, and went to Greg Sankey, NCAA, the whole bit. So he said that he was beyond thorough in the hiring process for Hugh. But he also said something along the lines of asking him and asking other people what happened to see if it lined up with what Hugh said, what happened. And it did, without sort of knowing, the other questions that were asked. So he's a big believer. He also told me that he is aware that it's going to take time, but he does want to see progress every single day out there. So I think the fact that there's a new administration, there's a lot of newness going on at Auburn, right? And I think that certainly works in his favor. And John reiterated multiple times that he did his due diligence in checking it out and making sure everyone was comfortable with it and that it was the right thing for them to do.
I want to hit a little bit on the politics of the job at Auburn. So again, you noted that in your article that Hugh Freeze said the boosters, they matter, right? But he's doing a job trying to balance, the politics with I still have to do my job and I can't let these other voices influence the program. Like, how much of a sense do you get that Hugh Freeze is in control of what he's doing at Auburn? I mean, Brian Harsin, there was a thought that he didn't play well with the boosters, and some support maybe got cut off from him because of that. Hugh Freeze understands the importance of building bridges with those people, but he still wants to run his program. Is Hugh Freeze in control here?
Well, I think we'll find out. Time will tell. But what he did say was that he wants to keep that circle kind of small. You got to let in who you need to let in, but not let it be a distraction as well. And I think some of that also goes back to the NIL conversation that we had of him not being completely ready for what was coming at him in that regard, because we know that's tied into the boosters as well. But I think also that goes to some of the turning over the play calling to Philip Montgomery, because a lot of these coaches that I'm talking to, Ryan Day included, who is considering this offseason, handing over the play calling duties, was like, we've got so much stuff going on that it's really hard to do. And so as you ask about control, that's being the CEO of the program, from NIL to the boosters to delegating play calling, all of those things. And I think that's not a question that you can answer immediately. I just, especially not after just a couple months on the job, does he have control? But he certainly seems to have in his head the way he would like it to work.
Yeah, for sure. Now, speaking of coordinators, you got a chance to sit down with the coordinators as well, too. Again, just a fantastic article that you wrote. You noted that Philip Montgomery at Baylor had an offense that averaged over 600 yards a game, which would be absolutely prolific at Auburn. Hugh Freeze is maybe giving up play calling for the first time in his career to Philip Montgomery. What sense did you get from Philip Montgomery about the type of offense they're going to run? And is it going to be more Philip Montgomery, or is it going to be more Hugh Freeze, or is it going to be just an even mix of both?
I did not get the sense that they're going to change anything. I mean, the up-tempo style, RPO, this is what they do. That's who they are. That's their identity. It's going to stay that way. It's interesting because Montgomery has that head coaching experience, which I think is extremely valuable in a coordinator position, but he's also humble enough to know that, hey, this is Hugh's offense and he's got the ultimate trump card. And if he wants to call something or do something, he's going to do it. And they talked about all this and had the conversations before Montgomery was hired. So I think there's an understanding there, which is extremely important. Everyone knows their roles, and that, hey, at the end of the day, Freeze is the ultimate final, red light, green light type on what happens in the offense. It's interesting. I was in Scottsdale and Gus Malzahn was there, and we chatted a little bit, and I asked him about Hugh, and none of that was in the story because it was later, but he obviously has confidence in him as well. But as regards to the play calling, Gus was like, I don't know who thinks they can do that anymore. I don't know who thinks they can do that. Like, it's really hard because of everything that coaches are being asked to do otherwise. But, and defensively, their goal is to be a top 20 defense at Auburn immediately. Can they do it? I don't know. We'll see. But I think that I pulled their schedule up. I mean, when you're looking at September, UMass, Cal, Stanford, that's 3 weeks of good preparedness.
Yeah.
To be kind, right? To see where you are going into Aggie land.
Yeah, listen, Hugh Freeze probably drew his dream schedule in year one, honestly. I think the Mississippi schools are maybe not so scary so far this year. Alabama actually first year, they have not had a clear successor at quarterback going into the fall camp. Georgia is Georgia. They battled LSU pretty tough last year, but I thought the schedule sets up well for him to at least get Auburn to a bowl game, right? And that's, kind of where I want to go next. Again, you sat down with Ron Roberts, and he talked about defense and wanting to get into the top 20, in the country in defense. Whether they can do that this year or not, we'll see. But is this a team that makes a bowl game this year? Again, you watched practice and you've been to other schools in the SEC as well, too. Like, is this a team that can win 6 and get to a bowl game?
They should start 3-0.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what's going to happen at Texas A&M. No one, Jimbo doesn't know what's happening at Texas A&M. Let's be real. They're going to lose to Georgia. I think they lose at LSU. I know they've got back-to-back home games, but I don't know that they're going to I don't think they beat Ole Miss. I don't know about Mississippi State. I don't think they beat Arkansas.
Oh man, Heather, you're killing me.
New Mexico State, sure, have at it. And then Bama. I mean, the one thing he said, and I can't remember if this quote was in the article, was that something along the lines of, I don't know if people understand what we have here, or something like that, because we were talking about expectations. Mm-hmm. And so I'm curious how high his expectations are, because he didn't really answer that question directly, and no coach ever will say, I think we're going to go to a bowl game or whatever it is. But it's not the X's and the O's, it's the Jimmies and the Joes, right?
Right. Okay. So are you saying that you feel like Hugh Freeze may feel like his roster may be at least like somewhat inadequate in year one? Like, we've got a lot of holes to fill. I don't think people understand how many holes to fill. Like when Brian Harsin came in, he said, listen, this is a mess. Guys aren't showing up to practice on time. Like, he really tried to sell to people, we need a whole cultural overhaul here. Right. And we know there was some truth to that based on how the difference between his style and Gus's. But, what did Hugh Freeze inherit? Really, we know recruiting wasn't what it was. He had to go out and get a bunch of linemen in the portal to fill holes on offensive line. But, you get a sense that he has faith in his roster to some extent?
Yeah, to some extent. And he's certainly never going to throw his players under the bus by any stretch of the imagination. So every coach is going to say we need a culture change. And in talking to some of the players there, they're buying in. So I think that's important as well. They're buying what he's selling right now. And a lot of these guys, these older guys, have been through multiple staff changes, multiple coordinators. And that plays a role in it too. So it's not just the talent on the roster, it's learning a new language again. So, I just think there's a lot of work to do. Now look, they might exceed expectations, and we'll look back on this podcast and be like, whoa, we missed the boat on these guys. But I just think that they're going to have a tough time this season. And I'm looking at those road trips, and especially, at LSU. I mean, they won the West last year. They're ahead of the game in Brian Kelly's second season. I didn't think they were going to do that last year. So we'll see. I didn't think TCU was going to be in the college football playoff either. So what the hell do I know, man?
I don't think any of us thought that for sure preseason. Heather, I want to close the interview out talking a little bit about how Auburn compares to what you saw around not only the SEC, but college football. I followed your travels closely. It was very exciting to watch. You visited a lot of programs this spring, and you have a unique perspective having visited so many programs. Where do you feel like maybe Auburn is at, in comparison to some of the other programs you visited in terms of process development, looking like a well-oiled machine? I know they are trying to get some things together, but is there a sense that the process is at least in place to catch up to those programs?
Let me tell you something. I went to Ohio State and sat down with Marvin Harrison Jr. and JT. I'm not even going to pronounce some of these last names. And Olu, their offensive lineman at Penn State. Kool-Aid at Alabama. I literally went from campus to campus and sat down with what should be some top 10 first round NFL draft picks. Great kids, unassuming, humble. And then you see the size, the speed. I mean, they're literally a different breed of athlete. And I did not see that when I was at practice at Auburn. Now, this is different because we're talking about the teams in the country that have recently played for either their conference championship. Now, Penn State's an exception, right? Or a national title. And when you look at Ohio State's offense, the razzle dazzle they got going on there at wide receiver, at running back, I mean, it's amazing. I don't know how else to say it. Can they do anything with it? I don't know. I'm picking Michigan to win the Big Ten, but we'll see what happens. But my point is there's a difference. There's a noticeable difference when you look out on the field and you see some of these guys.
Well, we know Hugh Freeze has got a task in front of him. The pressure will be on. We'll all be watching closely in year one to see what he can accomplish. I want to thank you, Heather, for taking some time to join me, talk a little bit about Auburn football. Before we close, can you tell people, how they can find your work and what you're doing this summer?
Thank you. I am on Instagram at CFB Heather and on Twitter at CFB Heather, and hopefully I'll be popping back on Get Up and Sports Center and all those things once we start getting close to the season. But before we go, am I missing somebody on Auburn's roster? Am I missing a first round NFL draft pick that I'm not thinking of?
Yeah, listen, I think Jarquez Hunter is a future NFL first round draft pick. And Hugh Freeze has already described him as the best back he's ever coached, and he hasn't coached him down yet. So, in the press conferences that we had weekly during the spring, we asked him about certain players. And, I got a chance to ask him about Jarquez Hunter. I said, Hugh, is there a battle going on at running back? And he seemed pretty confident. Listen, I've seen enough tape on Jarquez Hunter to know he's good. And that's not something he could say at the quarterback position or at the wide receiver position or at the tight end position. But there were only a few guys that they felt like, hey, we're solid here. This is our guy. So Jarquez Hunter probably stands out. I mean, he averaged something ridiculous like 6 or 7 yards a carry last year as a backup back. Yeah. So
and I want to be fair in that comment. There's talent on the roster. Let's not pretend there's not any talent on the roster, right? But collectively, are we talking about a national championship type roster? No. And I think that's the big picture thing. Are we talking about an SEC West championship roster? I don't think so. But again, what do I know?
Well, I read an article where someone said that getting Peyton Thorne or Casey Thompson would be the difference between Auburn making a bowl game or not making a bowl game. I kind of disagree with that sentiment. I thought, the coach, they won 5 games last year. And I feel like, the upgrade in coaching should be the difference between winning 5 games and winning 6 and 7. A good quarterback would be the difference between winning 6 or 7 games or having their 8 and 9 win season, maybe, if the coaching is there and the play calling is there. So they've got a lot of things that they've got to put together. It is the Jimmies and Joes. But what we saw, I think, in 2015 and 2016, because Hugh Freeze is on a short list of coaches that has 2 wins versus Nick Saban.
Right. Yeah, that's fair. But the big picture that we're talking about here is you're asking me, can Auburn get to a bowl game?
Yeah.
Not can Auburn win the SEC? And that's the climb that they got to make, right? So, I don't know.
Well, we'll see what they can do. Again, I want to thank Heather Dinich, senior writer for ESPN.com, for joining me. Guys, if you want more content like this, please hit like and subscribe. We are the War Report on every social media platform, TW Report on TikTok. We're signing off, and as always, War Eagle.